Okay, I have a couple takeaways to share too. And I don't say this lightly because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of young people. I worked for Praxis, which I talked about on Wednesday night, which had about a 7% acceptance rate. So we were very picky about who we worked with. You guys, I'm impressed. You guys ask great questions. Like seriously, so many hands going up after every talk, and you guys were asking amazing questions that were so indicative of the fact that you weren't just listening to what we were saying, but you were thinking about how to apply it to your lives and other things that you'd read and other disparate ideas, and you were figuring out how it all fits together in your individual worldview. You guys are awesome. You guys also were really bold in the breakout rooms. Yesterday when we were doing the Socratic discussions, you were so comfortable debating with each other and openly disagreeing with each other, and that's really hard to do. Most people have a really hard time saying to a room full of people, I disagree with you about this, which means one of us is wrong, maybe? Like, not everybody listening to us can think both of us are right. Like, people are going to be listening and saying, oh, I don't know if that's a good take. And that's a scary thing to do. And you guys did it so comfortably and so eloquently, and I'm seriously impressed. So one more round of applause, please, for yourselves. Good job, guys. Okay, so there's one more set of ideas that I want to leave you with before we wrap for the week. I want to talk to you about the art of learning out loud. I'm going to explain in a minute what I mean by this. But first, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context for what we did this week and how it fits into where you're going next and how we hope this serves as a launch pad for your future intellectual endeavors and explorations. This week was not designed to be a one and done experience. We packaged it all up so that you'd have everything that you need in a comprehensive week in Atlanta to, you're getting a full experience of learning and discussing, and you get to sing, and we made it a whole experience for you. But the intention wasn't just for you to come here and have a cool weekend and then leave and that's it. The idea was to set you up with a launch pad to teach you skills and practices that can be helpful to you over the course of a lifetime with any ideas that you want to engage with, anything that you want to learn. And you've learned some really powerful tools for thinking. The exercises that we went through yesterday where you were listening to talks and then engaging with the texts that influenced those talks and then rewriting those texts in your own words and then discussing them with each other, that's a really powerful intellectual process that you can repeat again and again. There are threads in the process that we took you through with hearing, listening, reading, writing, speaking, that I also want to tease out and make really obvious because they're really important. So you learned about speaking, you learned about writing, you got to practice those things. You got to do them in tandem with listening and reading. And these processes all happening together was very deliberate, and it's very important. Speaking and writing feed into each other. You talk about ideas, then you write them down, then you talk about them some more, and then you write them down. You read about ideas, and then you go talk about them with someone, and you formulate your own thoughts about them, and then maybe you do some writing, and then you go read again because you have new questions. Reading, writing, speaking, thinking, they're all part of the same process of honing your worldview and honing your ideas. Like, what do you think about things? The only way to answer that question is to read a lot, speak a lot, write a lot, listen to other ideas and see if you agree or disagree. And that's the process that we've been very deliberately walking you through over the course of this week. I want to tell you a story. There's an internet writer by the name of David Perel. Has anyone heard of him before? Okay. Oh, okay. Couple hands in the back. Yeah, I knew you guys knew about him already. So David Perel, when he was in college and fresh out of college, he started writing on the internet. He opened a Twitter account and started tweeting about the things he was reading about. And he started a podcast so that he could talk to people he thought was interesting. Sidebar, pro tip, you guys, having a podcast is the best excuse ever to get to talk to really cool people. Highly recommend starting one. You can reach out to somebody and be like, hey, could I like get you on an hour-long call to ask you for advice? And they'll be like, I'm sorry, I'm busy. You send them a message and say, hey, could you come talk on my podcast for an hour? They're much more likely to say yes, because to them it feels like a high value thing, but you can still ask them the same questions. It's just more likely to get them on the phone. Highly recommend. So David started a podcast, and he wasn't terribly focused about like an area of expertise or anything. He was just really interested in learning about the world and talking to people who were building businesses and writing books. And he recorded his podcast for years. And over the course of that time, he also started writing essays on the internet. Again, not super focused. He was just kind of writing about things he was learning about. He was learning about the history of religion, and he was learning about business, and he was learning about the stories of famous entrepreneurs. And as he was learning, he was writing. And slowly over time, his areas of interest started to get more and more focused. And as they got more focused, he started building a bigger following because people also were interested in the same things he was interested in. And he started to become like a Twitter micro celebrity, and people really liked his takes. And as he was going through this process, he realized that actually the thing that he was most interested wasn't even the ideas he was writing about, it was the process of writing itself. And so he started writing about how to write, and then he had an idea to launch a writing course. He went through somebody else's course about information management. He's like, I could totally do this. And so he started a course about how to write, and the first cohort was a very patched together project. It was, kind of disorganized Zoom calls, and there was no process for managing anything, but he put it out into the world, and he got a bunch of people to sign up, and he did a really good job delivering the course, and people loved it, and they started telling their friends, and they started reviewing it, and then more people signed up for the next cohort, and more people signed up for the next cohort. He's been running this writing course for the past 5 years. He's gotten really good at it. He makes millions of dollars doing this. He has a whole team of people all over the world who are supporting in the building of this. He now runs a podcast called How I Write, where he interviews some of the most famous authors in the world about their writing process. And he's considered, at least by people on Twitter, to be probably the best writing teacher in the world. He did not do all of this intentionally. He didn't start a podcast when he was like 21 years old because he thought someday he'd create a famous writing course. He was just following the things that he was interested in. To the talk that we had on Wednesday night, he was taking an emergent path, following his curiosities, using that as a compass and seeing where it led him. But he also was engaged in another practice that's really, really important, and it's the practice of learning out loud. He was learning about things, but instead of just learning about them and digesting the information and having all these opinions and the world will never know, he was sharing things as he was learning them. And some of the things that he was sharing were things that he wasn't an expert in. He didn't know that much about, but he was reading about them. He was answering his own questions. And then after he satisfied his own curiosity, he's like, okay, I understand something about this question I had. He would write about it and he would publish it. And that was the one thing he was very dedicated about. He changed his mind all the time about his takes on things. He changed his mind about what he was interested in, but he always showed up and published what he was working on. And that's the reason why he's been so successful. And that's also the reason why he figured out what he wanted to do. He wouldn't have known he wanted to teach a writing course if he'd never written anything. And no one ever would have signed up for it if he didn't have years of publication history where he'd actually honed his skills as a writer and gotten good at it. But his whole thesis that he's teaching people in his course isn't actually really like, here's all the mechanics of writing a good article. He'll teach you that too. But really what he's teaching you is the importance of putting your ideas out into the world. We taught something very similar at Praxis. When students would come into the program, we would talk to them about how to build a portfolio. Basically, what we were doing is helping people who had no previous experience working in startups or business land jobs in startups or business. So somehow you have to convince people to take a chance on you because you have no actual track record of doing the work. But what we were helping people do is build a portfolio of the projects that they'd done, the skills that they'd learned, the things that they'd been thinking about, the ideas that they'd grappled with. And they did all of that by primarily writing about these things. So this process of learning out loud is extraordinarily powerful. We used it to help hundreds of kids at Praxis land jobs that on paper they weren't qualified for, but they used the portfolios that they built to prove that they could do the work. The process of learning out loud, the idea of learning out loud, it sounds kind of scary. Because basically what you're being asked to do, or asking yourself to do, is go on the internet, or read a book, or listen to a podcast, and learn about something that you previously didn't know anything about. And then you're gonna write down what you learned or what you thought about it, and you're going to put it on the internet for anybody to see. And that's really scary because you don't know who's gonna see it. You don't know what they're gonna think of it. You don't know what holes they're gonna find in your logic and say, wow, she clearly didn't understand that at all. People who are gonna completely disagree with you. But it's also incredibly powerful. And it's also actually less scary than it sounds, because nobody expects you, if you're engaged in a process of learning, nobody expects you to be an expert. You're not saying, wow, I am like the preeminent expert on limited government because I went to a 3-day seminar with Fee in Atlanta and now I'm going to write the preeminent essays on limited government for everyone to read. That's not how you're positioning yourself. You're saying, I just learned about this and I think it's really interesting and here's my biggest takeaway. And that's powerful because everybody in the world wants to work with people who are curious, who are learning, who are asking questions and answering them, who are active minds, which is why we called this conference Active Minds. It's what you are, but it's also what the world craves. And learning about things and sharing what you're learning is one of the most powerful ways to signal that that is what you are. I've talked to a lot of you this week. I know that's what you are. I know you have big ideas that you're thinking about and interesting takes on things. The world deserves to see that too. So I want to walk you through the process of learning out loud as a final invitation of this week. As you go forth into the world, you go back to your homes and maybe some fire has been lit inside of you that you want to keep engaging in the process that you've been engaging with this weekend. You can, and this is my top recommendation for how. So when you're learning out loud, there are many different ways that you can engage in this process. If you're someone who likes social media, I know we have some social media people in here. Yes, I'm looking at you. You can use that as a platform for learning out loud. And in some ways, it's the most low stakes, low pressure place to learn out loud because when you're tweeting, nobody expects you to be publishing a thesis. It's just a tweet. They're like, if I had to guess if it's like a thesis or a shower thought, it's much more likely to be a shower thought. Like it's something that like off the cuff, you're thinking about, you publish it. Nobody expects it to be perfect. And you also get real-time feedback. So you can publish something, 280 character thought about something you learned or maybe a Twitter thread, and people will answer right away and they'll tell you what they think. And maybe they're going to disagree with you, maybe you're going to disagree with them, but you're going to be able to test your thoughts against other people's feedback and get real-time data on not only how other people respond, but also, well, what do you think in response to those takes? Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. But that's really powerful. It's also a great way to build a network because when you're talking about things, algorithms on social media are designed to help people find things they're interested in. So if people have topics that they find interesting, the algorithm wants to put as many similar pieces of content about those topics in front of them as possible. So the whole algorithm's already set up to help you find other people who are interested in the same ideas. So you can build a network of other people out in the world who are thinking about the same things you are. And that's also really powerful because it gives you people to debate ideas with, to have conversations with, to, hone your ideas with. And that's an accelerant in your thinking process. But social media is by no means the only way that the only outlet for this process. We've talked a little bit about the process of writing articles and essays. I highly recommend blogging or starting a Substack, which is a great platform for building out a portfolio of things that you've written. You can write for third-party publications. You can submit a piece to fee. I highly recommend the process of submitting to a third-party publication because it allows you to work with an editor, which is, if you haven't done it before, a really, really great experience that will help you see very clearly your own writing through someone's constructive eyes. But it's also a great way to check your ideas because an editor won't let you publish something that's terrible, right, Dan? If you have a bad take, you won't publish it, right? They'll make sure it makes sense and is ready for the world before it goes out into public, right? Okay, that's good because I really trust you with that sometimes. I send you something and this is either good or awful and I don't know which, but I know Dan will tell me. So submitting something to an editor is a great way to really dial in your ideas. I've grown so much as a writer by working with people who've helped me really craft my ideas. But publishing with a third party also gives you credibility because it shows the world that somebody else who had some level of established credibility thought you had a good take. And that's a really powerful signal to have in your portfolio. You don't have to write either. If you like speaking, start a podcast. Interview people who are experts in the things that you're interested in and ask them questions and go through the process of learning out loud. Honestly, this is kind of what I do with my podcast on education. I know some things about education too, but I get to talk to people who are professors and researchers and have 30 years of experience building schools. And because I'm the one facilitating the conversation, I get to ask them all the things I want to know. So I get to really dial in my knowledge. But also because I'm the one hosting the podcast, it kind of gives me this level of credibility where I'm the one hosting the conversation, so I have to know something. And that's also a really powerful signal to put out into the world. You can make videos. You can make YouTube videos where you talk about the things that you're learning about, if that's your preferred medium. There's no right way to do it. It's the process itself that is important. There are also lots of ways to structure the content that you're putting out into the world. It doesn't just have to be an informative essay where you break down, the top 3 principles of individual rights in a, very formulaic and very academic essay style. You could write a how-to where you teach somebody something. Every single one of you spent time yesterday learning about the keyword exercise method. Every single one of you could write a how-to now on how to do that. You might not include all the things that Lola would include if she wrote a how-to, but you've gone through the process. You know how to do it. You can write from your perspective. This is how you use a keyword exercise outline to really dial in your understanding of a passage that you read. And you might include something different than what Lola would include that's also really valuable because you have a different perspective on it, and that might actually be the thing that resonates with somebody else. And that's the thing that I feel like is really important in the process of learning out loud, is remembering that you don't have to be the world's preeminent expert in something in order to be helpful to someone else. You, a week ago, for most of you, probably didn't know how to do a keyword outline, right? Did any of you know how to do a keyword outline prior to this week? Give me a show of hands. Okay, most of you didn't. You now know how to do this. A week ago, you would have found this useful because a week ago, you didn't know how to do this yet. And someone who's 1 week behind you in their learning process is your article might be the thing that teaches them how to do this. You don't know. But probably somebody will find it valuable. And who are you to keep that knowledge from the world? If you found something, ask yourself that. If you found something useful, who are you to not share it? Maybe this is really helpful information for somebody and they would find it if you published it. And if you don't publish it, they'll never know about it, It can be scary to publish, but maybe there's downsides to not publishing too, How-tos are such a great way to learn out loud because you're teaching somebody something. It gives you a very clear-cut structure to describe something, to organize information. And it's also a way to build up a portfolio of being useful to people, which is a great way to build an audience. You can also write more traditional essays. You can write opinion pieces. You guys are probably relating the things that you learned about this week to experiences that you've had in your lives, to situations that you see in your hometown or your home country or in the world at large. You're qualified to have an opinion. You can write an opinion piece about that. You can tie it back to something that you've experienced in the real world and write a phenomenal essay. You don't have to be a preeminent expert in something to be able to have a really great observational take about the world that you live in. You are 100% qualified to write an article like that, to record a video like that. You can write personal anecdotes. Again, this is something that really kind of lowers the threshold of I'm not an expert. I don't know if I can write about this, because it's just a personal anecdote. It's just something that happened to you. You don't have to be an expert to know what you experienced, right? You can share stories about things that you've experienced. Places you've gone, things you've observed, activities you partook in, things that you learned along the way. Those can be really interesting to people. They can be really helpful to people. Some of the best things on the internet are people sharing their stories because it's the most relatable thing. You can read a million how-to articles, but they're not going to hit the way somebody's story about something they've experienced has hit. And I've talked to, again, a lot of you over the course of this week. I know you guys have great stories. Tell them. You can also write informational pieces where you share resources on things that you've learned about. This is a great way to really dial in your knowledge because you have to make sure that there are no gaps, no missing pieces. You can write something about the things that you've learned in a way that's intended to inform someone else. And again, if you've learned about it, you can share what you've learned. You are qualified to do that. You are ready to do that. This process is one of the fastest and most effective ways I know to really flesh out your own thinking, because nothing is as challenging and as pointed as getting all your ideas down on paper or into an outline that you're going to use for a video, or having a conversation on a podcast and realizing, okay, there are 4 gaping holes in my knowledge that I have to go fill before I really understand this idea. Before I can really deliver a how-to. And in that process, you might realize that your original take actually isn't quite right, and you need to go kind of alter what you're saying in order to really dial it in. Sometimes you're going to publish stuff, and then later you're going to say, you know what, I'm not actually sure I got it quite right, but all the great thinkers did that too. It's okay. But it is one of the most effective ways to both measure your own thinking for yourself, but also sharpen it and also remember it. We don't implement any of this in our actual school system in most of the world, but for the past 50 years, researchers at all of the biggest American universities have been conducting what's called learning science, which is basically the science of how we learn. And one of the things that they've seen again and again is that people remember things best when they're forced to actively recall the things that they've learned. So if you come to an event like this and you get a deluge of information and it's a little overwhelming because we covered a lot of ground, you've definitely learned a lot, but you're not necessarily going to retain everything at the level that you might hope, because your brain's constantly filtering out what information do I need and what information do I not need. And it's determining that in part by determining what information you're using. So if you have information that you're actively recalling, your brain's going to strengthen the pathways to access that information. Is going to be easier to recall it in future. When you're writing about something, you're actively recalling again and again what you learned about, your thoughts about a piece, a thought about an idea, and that's going to strengthen the pathways of your own retention and your own understanding. Okay. I also want to invite you to look for places to continuously get support in this process. You absolutely can do this alone, 100%. You do not need anybody supporting you in order to engage in the process of learning out loud. You don't need anyone's permission. But it can be helpful to have other people reading your work, giving you support, helping you refine your ideas. And on the backs of all of your booklets, all of your workbooks for this week, there's a QR code. And that QR code will lead you in part to the FEE website, where you can read lots of articles to spark your ideation machine. You also can submit articles, and we would love to see them. They're also, in that link that will come up with the QR code, you can be linked to information about the fellowships that we run at FEE. And after talking to many of you over the course of this week, many of you would be fantastic candidates for this, and I would highly encourage applying. Continue to use FEE as a resource. We're here to support you. We would love nothing more. You can find all of the speakers on Twitter. I mentioned this in the first talk too. I would highly recommend reaching out, asking questions, sending a thank you with your top takeaways. Speakers always remember that. Engage with us on Twitter. Nurture this as an actual relationship that you're building with other thinkers. Like, we're part of your network now. You got to talk to all of us. Like, we're in your corner. Take advantage of that. Keep writing. Publish something, share it online when you do. Keep in touch with each other. You guys are all interested in the same ideas. Who better to continue talking about the things that you're learning about and honing and sharpening your minds? Keep speaking about the things that you're learning about, and keep going through this process of reading, learning, talking about the ideas, publishing them, talking about them some more, publishing another take, talking about them some more, honing in your thoughts over time. This is a process that writers use to eventually publish books. They talk about ideas, they write about them, they talk, they write, they talk, they write. Eventually they hone some of their different writings into a longer form book. We've been so impressed by you. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy lives to be here. Thank you, chaperones, for supporting our students and being here. It's been such an honor to get to be your MC and to get to be with you through this process. Thank you. Abby, do we have time for a question or two, or are we out of time? We're out of time. Amazing, okay. I mean, not amazing, I would have loved to take questions, but cool.